My name is Ali Beeman, and I'm a senior research analyst at Y Labs. And today I'm so excited to share with you the results for the Future of Sex Education study, and just really want to thank Tanya for inviting me and Y Labs to present our work here today. So to begin, before we begin, I just wanted to give a special shout out to our advisory board members and funders who made this work really possible. So to our funders, the Vittel Foundation, the Case for Her, Waterloo, and our advisory board members, of which Urshi is one of them. So thank you so much. But also Dr. Chandra Muli, Mazuba Hanema, and Amaka Moma Harana, and Julia Greenland. These folks really generously contributed their time and expertise to help guide this research. So when I begin, I definitely do not need to tell a group of experts such as yourself why we are here today. As we know, young people across the globe have an unmet need for relevant, accessible, accurate, and inclusive sex education. You might hear me say this a few times today, but this problem really has persisted across generations, geographies, and genders. Recently, there has been a ton of amazing work done in the CSE space, and this work really tried to build on that. We believe that there's never been a better time to really prioritize a youth-driven approach to understanding what young people's real needs are regarding sex education and how pleasure also plays a role in that. So this is a time to truly listen to young people as we think about new and novel approaches in designing and delivering the future of sex education. So to support this vision, Y Labs kind of embarked on, to our knowledge at least, of a first-of-kind study of mixed methods across 4 different countries to really understand what young people want to learn in sex education, how they want to learn it, and from whom. We ended up engaging over 12,000 young people across Nigeria, El Salvador, India, and the US. And we also didn't really stop there. We recognize that young people's decisions aren't made in isolation. We also engaged with key stakeholders who played a significant role in their lives, and interviewed parents, teachers, healthcare providers, and also sex education experts to gain a more holistic understanding of the ecosystem surrounding youth and sex education and how they also might play a role in the future innovations of sex education. So we had 3 main research questions that guided our mixed method study, which were: what information about sex and sexuality do young people want to learn? How do young people want to learn, or how do young people want their sex education delivered? And what are the current trends? And what role do parents, teachers, and healthcare providers play in providing young people with the information about sex and their sexuality? One of the real true hallmarks, I believe, of the study is that this was completely youth-driven research project. So we hired 8 young people were recruited to join the team, and they are trained on topics such as HCD, safeguarding, data collection, and synthesis. And they are also involved in all phases of the project, such as the development and iteration of research tools, conducting the interviews, and also the synthesis of the data itself. So we had a lot of different types of research that we were conducting all at once. So for a quantitative part of the study, we conducted a survey that consisted of 10 questions that were looking at a population between 18 to 24 years. And in India and Nigeria, we partnered with Viamo to conduct an interactive voice response survey through random digit dialing. And then in the US and Salvador, we conducted the same survey, but on Facebook. And then we also supplemented these quantitative surveys to really dive deeper into our research questions with in-person, in-depth interviews and also focus groups. And finally, we also conducted 8 co-design sessions with young people where they actually got to create and share their own concepts for their future of sex education. I'm going to skip over a little bit more of the methods just to dive into some of the results, but happy to talk more about methods later for sure. But for the qualitative research participants, we interviewed 146 young people that included in and out of school youth, youth living with disabilities, those who identified as LGBTQ+, and youth that had limited digital access, literacy, and also were low income. In addition, like I said, we conducted 68 key stakeholder interviews. For the quantitative research, we ended up having an impressive number of over 10,000 respondents from the IVR survey, which was again conducted just in Nigeria and India. It's worth noting the difference in male and female, I believe. So the majority were male who answered the IVR response. And then in El Salvador in the US on the Facebook survey, we had 1,590 respondents with a flip actually and mostly females answering. But to really start to dive into the results here, one of our first insights was that silence from caregivers at an early age about consent and bodily autonomy is really resulting in an increasingly common experience of early, coercive, and traumatic sexual experiences for today's youth. Youth reported desperately wanting information on how to advocate for consent, how to navigate trauma, harm, and accountability if their consent was breached. They really expressed a desire for these lessons to be delivered earlier in life and ideally actually by their caregivers, as they saw this was a great way to bond with them. Parents and teachers also agreed that this was really appropriate and wanted to, but they felt that they didn't know how, and that's due to generational shame, changes in values, and lack of knowledge, and fear that discussing these topics would lead to a broader set of sex information questions that they were not prepared to answer. They usually remain silent in this way. So from the survey, we found that revealed that almost 13% of 4,690 young people's sexual debut happened before they turned 10 years of age. And in places like Nigeria, it's over 20% of young people that answered the survey had sex before the age of 10. And then among respondents for the study, we also found that 20% of 8,848 respondents selected how to say no, I don't want to have sex as their most preferred topic to learn in their sex education out of 8 possible different topics. And notably, those who had sex for the first time when they were less than 10 years were over 2 times more likely to be interested in learning how to say no compared to their peers. So why does this matter? An alarming rate of young people are experiencing coerce and forced assault at a young vulnerable age. And this harmful introduction into sexual intimacy has lasting ramifications on young people's physical, emotional, and psychological well-being, and really compromises their ability to advocate for their self-protection in future relationships. This impact of this harm is intergenerational and can preclude young people from modeling healthy sexual behaviors for generations to come. Insight 2 is that traditional approaches to deliver sex education optimize for biology, really leaving young people unprepared to navigate the emotional and psychological hurdles of their sexual behavior and identity. When parents and teachers end up actually discussing sex, they're most comfortable talking, as we know, about biological elements and anatomy, and also the potential consequences of sex, rather than talking about young people's sex lives and answering their specific questions. This approach really fails to acknowledge young people's reasons for engaging in sexual relationships, including love and intimacy, social status, and peer and partner pressure, and also pleasure. And this avoidance or difficulty of discussing sexuality and sex beyond biology with youth really instills the notion that sex and the emotions that surround it are shameful, taboo, and that you should feel guilty if they want to or have engaged in sexual acts. When we asked young people what is one question they had about sex and relationships from the FSC survey, we found that over 90% of the 1,000 submitted questions were not related to biology or anatomy at all, but instead, such as 33% of the questions were about communication, relationships, and how to navigate these emotions during a period of discovery of their sexual and gender identity. So why is this important again? Self-efficacy and emotional well-being are critical precursors in protecting one's physical health. Yet young people are poorly equipped to engage in sexual activity without preliminary guidance on how to navigate interpersonal and emotional components to sex and relationships in a safe, judgment-free place. Insight 3. When young people are learning about sex, it's in isolation, which really prevents them from understanding the lived experiences of young people who share different gender or sexual orientations. The more marginalized they are, the more isolated they feel, which creates greater division, stigma, and harm. Without this immersive, inclusive, and gender transformative approaches to sex education, youth are poorly equipped to understand the problems their peers face. The result is lack of empathy and experiences that differ from those from them, and for being champions for each other. And this contributes to misunderstandings of each other, online bullying, and even harm. For instance, when youth and teachers really reported when discussed, LGBTQ information is presented as a lifestyle choice that is morally wrong. As a result, cis and heterosexually identifying young people agree that it's difficult for them to view LGBTQ people in a more positive and empathetic light. Due to this limited and tailored sex education, LGBTQ youth report having to rely on self-directed learning, which has exposed them to risky behaviors and greater internalized self-shame and depression. So global quantitative data from the FSC survey reported that 73% of non-binary young people were unsatisfied with sex education that they have received. This means that they are 3.5 times more likely to be unsatisfied with the sex education they've received compared to their cisgendered peers. So why does this matter? This matters that isolated learning perpetuates a lack of understanding and empathy, stigma, and violence against those who do not share the same gender or sexual orientation. Insight 4. Young people report feelings of extreme exhaustion trying to navigate the mental gymnastics of cross-validating, contradicting information they receive from parents, friends, teachers, and the internet. Without a conclusive place to land, youth are left to validate their questions through personal experience at their own risk. Young people are having to cross-validate this information with their parents, with their friends, with the internet. And generally, they're not finding answers that truly feel real to them. They don't have any of these trusted sources, and they often get overwhelmed and confused by the information. And often, like I said, these are contradicting each other. And what is shared online and their traditional values are imparted to them by their caregivers further senses this isolation and confusion they feel. From the global quantitative data from the FSC survey, we see that young people do not have one primary resource for their sex education, and they have to ping pong between all these different sources, usually optimizing for those that they believe is confidential, accurate, and non-judgmental. So why does this matter? Youth are designing their own ad hoc education as they go, leading to adverse sexual experiences, including non-consensual sex, unplanned pregnancies, and sexually transmitted infections. And our last insight is that youth are really defining pleasure as the psychological safety and consent, but don't have the skills or language to advocate for their needs, let alone the agency to play a directive role in experiencing physical pleasure. When we went to talk to youth, we really found at the core of pleasure is this emotional well-being and psychological safety that they feel in the context of a sexual relationship. When we asked them what would make them feel most pleasurable, their top concerns were always consent, partner communication, being in a committed relationship, trust, and being able to express themselves without shame. The problem is that they really do not have the language or ability to communicate this, to set boundaries with their partner, and let alone, again, talking about their physical aspects of pleasure. We constantly hear that sex education does not give them the language to do this. And this leaves youth unprepared and unequipped to initiate these crucial conversations and know when they are not feeling safe, basically. So why does this matter? Equipping youth with the tools to build their sexual self-efficacy will give them the language to talk about their sexual preferences, expectations, and boundaries. This is critical to supporting youth to make healthier, more confident decisions about their sexual health and interpersonal relationships. So now we heard some of the findings from the Future Sex Education study, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't stop there, but that we really wanted people to walk away from this research knowing how they can create action. So with young people leading, we helped derive 5 design principles to help ground ourselves in transforming sex education. Of the first is the future is more than biology. Sex education needs to be told with stories and emotions through experiences that are relatable to youth. We know that biological approaches to sex education are not giving young people the information they need or want, but should include experiences youth face around peer pressure, sexual urgences, emotions, and so forth. As you can see from the chart below, youth have so many different topics that they want to learn about. The next is the future is pleasure. Even though youth want to learn from various different topics, we know that pleasure is a core component for safety and that youth are missing the language of how to talk about this. Traditional sex education is failing to provide this, and we need to give them the language to be able to talk about agency, safety, and consent. The future is digital. So globally, we found that 50.8% of 7,733 young people, most preferred resource for learning about sex includes some form of digital media or technology. Youth are really turning to the internet for a lot of these questions. The future is family. We know that at the core that young people really want to bond and trust their caregivers when it comes to sex education. Overall, 23% of 10,348 youth reported that they would feel most comfortable learning about sex at home. And from our qualitative research, if parents were supported more, this number would be a lot higher than it currently is. The future is inclusive. Everyone wants to know everything and everyone should be taught everything. So boys should know about periods. Everyone should know about LGBTQ information. It should just all be inclusive. So pro tips about how to go about designing and delivering your future sex education is really engage a diverse group of young people, taking into account different ages, sexual orientations, and literacies to co-design and test information that is engaging content that is responsive to their real questions and concerns. You need to prototype. Before diving into implementation, work with youth to build and test various program features such as Q&A sessions, crisis support channels, and linkage to care options to determine which features youth find most engaging and support knowledge, self-efficacy, and behavior change. And again, family, we really encourage that we engage young people and caregivers to prototype family-centered sex education that allows caregivers and young people to really explore sex education together by identifying commonalities among their preferred channels and content and help foster these conversations. So what is next for the future of sex education? Recently, we just held a global convening that brought together tons of people from around the world to share some of these findings and really start a momentum. We're currently writing a manuscript to be published, but we're also in the midst of trying to find some more funding for our phase 2 research, which is really exciting. So we will be going back to Nigeria to work in partnership with youth and Nigerian social media influencers to really co-design and develop and test quality youth-led sex education services for social media dissemination that also have a linkage to youth-friendly SRH services and also a part that is family-centered. And this project really seeks to demonstrate how sex education can be reimagined and delivered by youth for youth in a way that is engaging and relevant for an increasingly digitally connected generation. And finally, if you have some more questions about the future of sex education, you can visit our website here, or you can also contact me. Would love to talk to all of you more in my emails there, and I'll also drop it in the chat. But thank you all so much for listening today.